Check, check.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to friends and colleagues from around the world. Welcome to this thematic forum that looks at community involvement in infrastructure recovery and reconstruction. The world is witnessing an increase in disasters. We need to anticipate these and we need to prepare. We also need to build back better with local communities at the heart of the recovery and reconstruction process. This session will reflect on experiences from around the world. It is my privilege to introduce the moderator, Ms. Rita Misal. Ms. Rita Misal is the Global Recovery Advisor for UNDP's Crisis Bureau in New York. She brings over 2 decades of experience in disaster recovery. She started her career in disaster management after the super cyclone in Odisha in 1999 at the UN office in India. After the Asian tsunami in 2004, she managed disaster recovery in Maldives. And since, she's been working in several UN offices across Geneva, Bangkok, and New York. Over to you, Rita.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. Good day to all of you. We reached the end of today's session, and I hope you'll bear with us and be patient with us as we go through this very, very interesting session. He's already introduced the session, which is about the engagement of local communities, local governments in rebuilding infrastructure for building resilience. We have a very eminent list of 5 speakers today, with the keynote speaker, Mr. Anil Pokhrel, and then 4 others who will be speaking from a variety of experiences all over the world. We all know the importance of consulting people in decision making. Just try it when you go to a restaurant with your family and order something for someone else, and you will realize how important it is to have consulted them before, even if you ask them what would they like to eat, right? So, even such a small thing, we realize it can create quite a storm if you did not consult the people. So imagine how important it is to get into the space of engaging communities or engaging people for their own welfare and for their own life, or their own space that they would live around with, right? So infrastructure rebuilding is a very, very vast subject, very technical, and highly skilled personnel work in this field. I have to my right Dr. Kit, who has been engaged in this with his own firm all over the globe. We have others who are joining, who have been part of very, very extensive, large infrastructure experiences. However, today we are going to just turn around and pivot around to look at what it means to look at it from the angle of what are the people these infrastructure services, who is the center of this infrastructure, who are you doing it for, and how those people are engaged in the decision making, design, in the process of construction, and maybe again as end users, what is their views of it, right? So we get into that space of discussion. I was very recently in Odisha 2 years back. I wouldn't say that recently, but after Cyclone Fani. And after the cyclone happened, we had a CSO consultation. There were about 100 people, and we just invited a lot of community people, including one disability activist. He was disabled by himself. And his only message to us was, please give us a seat at the decision making. We don't need anything else from you. Then everything else will go right. So while we create fine infrastructure, accessible infrastructure, examples like what they did in Nepal with some of the housing, where I personally have met and seen Khil Bahadur, who is visually impaired, and whose house was specifically designed around how he would move around the house, moving with, and feeling his way through the house, and familiarity in that space. The reconstruction program supported is very, very critical. So without much ado, I would like now to invite our keynote speaker, Dr. Anil Pokhrel. It's my pleasure. We met each other very briefly. Thankfully, the pandemic is nearly over, allowing us to travel, and so we meet in person now. He's the Chief Executive of the National Disaster Management Risk Reduction Authority in Nepal. And over to you, Dr. Pokhrel.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you, Rita. Thank you so much. Thanks to CDRI for this opportunity to share Nepal's post-earthquake infrastructure recovery and reconstruction experience, focusing on inclusive community involvement. The foundations for Nepal's successful post-2015 earthquake reconstruction and recovery was laid out following the aftermath of the 1988 Udaipur earthquake. This goes long back. Organizations such as NSET, I see colleagues with me here today as well, they were founded back after the 1988 earthquake. And development partners such as USAID, JICA provided early on technical support and financial support for awareness building, capacity building, and risk assessment. The Hyogo framework gave impetus to prepare Nepal's first strategy for DRR. This led to an increased effort on building awareness among policymakers and communities. So in 2009, the Nepal Risk Reduction Consortium, a unique partnership among numerous development partners, UN agencies, humanitarian agencies, they came together and set up this consortium where we had a series of flagship that involved retrofitting of schools, health facilities, and started, again, a community-centered approach. Thanks to all those investments, starting long back, the schools and health facilities that were retrofitted were not damaged during the 2015 earthquake, and they also served as safe shelters. Today, I again remember the time when the catastrophic earthquake hit our country, Gorkha, with a 7.6 magnitude on April 25, 2015. We nearly lost 9,000 people, more than 22,000 were injured, and damage more than $7 billion. Almost one-third of the country was affected. The Nepali community and the government, along with the assistance of international communities, joined hands together and successfully completed the rescue and relief operations. Then we embarked on a PDNA, where I know Maitewa was very helpful as well, with a lot of other actors as well, and along with the damage grade assessments of houses and key infrastructures such as schools and health facilities. And then the work on reconstruction and recovery effort began with the establishment of an autonomous national entity, the National Reconstruction Authority. The CEO of the NRA is here with us today as well. Mr. Sushil Giwali is just over there. Now, the NRA has been closed after successful completion of its task of reconstructing people-centered infrastructures. A big number of 750,000 houses, private houses, have been built using owner-driven reconstruction approach. Thousands of other schools, wonderfully kind of designed and constructed health facilities, hundreds of archaeological monuments, government and security agency buildings, roads, drinking water systems, much of which have been built through people participation, and especially the role of earthquake reconstruction committees at the communities. So to the central of Nepal's reconstruction experience was the leave no one behind concept that focused on the most vulnerable, as you mentioned, Rita, earlier, especially persons with disabilities, designing for their needs, elderly, single mothers, and the landless, to help build their houses using better approach. Mountain communities provide a concept such as Arma Parma in Nepali, and so it literally translates into an indigenous system where houses and communities help each other. And so especially in these isolated communities, this Arma Parma system was backed up with an additional 50,000 Nepali rupee grant to these most vulnerable houses. So there are volunteers, there's communities helping each other, especially for this vulnerable and the persons with disabilities. So with all this effort, what we've seen is our structures, our houses, and these structures are safer from future potential earthquakes and also other disasters. We've been able to resettle, apart from these houses, another 4,000 houses from 300 odd risky settlements to safer locations. Yes. So in this process, almost 14,000 landless families have received land, and they built their homes, and almost 15,000 of vulnerable families have received additional assistance to build their houses. Now, in this whole process, we've been able to train more than 77,000 masons directly, of which I'd like to say that 15,000 of these masons are women. Earlier this year, we had a handover session in Kathmandu, where the government of India and NRA and a lot of other development partners came together to really reflect on the lessons of these houses that were built. The women masons that came into Kathmandu said like they were really kind of happy to share their experience of being a mason, but also not only again being a mason itself, but also being as champions and role models for other future girls and children who could take up their roles. One of the women who came up was so much happy that she said like again she had to kind of climb a 2-storied roof. And again, doing the roof herself as being a lady is something that she really takes pride of. And so she's now considered as one of a role model within the community itself. But apart from, again, these masons and these structures, Government of India's support has been instrumental, especially for other structures such as hospitals, heritage monuments as well. USAID alone has provided more than $200 million of support for housing and social infrastructures. So this social and technical facilitation has been critical to the design of these projects. So going through this, reflecting on the lessons, what we've learned is that we need to now, again, building on this experience, we need to act now for making our nation resilient from not only earthquakes, but also future disasters such as landslides, floods, forest fires, and so on. We've experienced an unprecedented number of forest fires last year. And above all, people have to be at the center. So these experiences, especially reaching out to this most vulnerable, needs to scale up across the country. So in our collective effort to make Nepal a disaster resilient nation, we now have a permanent institution which I happen to head at. The National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Authority was established under a separate act of the Parliament. We've also prepared the national strategy for DRRM, building on the previous experience. So this spans up to 2030, and currently we're in the process of, again, developing a national framework that identifies roles and responsibilities, but also the financing needs for each of those priority areas. So this institutional memory built on over the last 7 years from NRA has now been transferred over to NDRMA and other relevant government ministries and agencies. Now, what I'd also like to mention at this outset is Nepal is very highly vulnerable to various types of natural hazards, impacts of which will be worsened by climate change. We witnessed 2 major climate-related disasters that brought complex cascading disasters in the spring and fall of 2021, bringing heavy rains, floods, and landslides that claimed dozens of lives, again, last year. And so it destroyed thousands of houses, damaged hundreds of, again, water supply schemes, irrigation structures, dozens of, again, breezes, stretches of highways. And so it led to the government of Nepal declaring these 2 districts, Sindhupalchok and Manang, but also 38 other municipalities as state of disaster emergencies in this year, 2021 alone. So we're working, again, building on the experience that we gained through NRA to reconstruct these houses, especially for families. In this whole process, what we also witnessed is the Melamchi River Valley got hit the hardest. We faced an unprecedented debris flow and floods that damaged a major interbasin transfer of water into the Kathmandu Valley. Thousands of houses have been lost. Dozens of breezes again within the small stretch, 6 breezes within a small stretch of the river system are all buried, including hundreds of houses under 15 to 24 meters of debris. So this debris does not stay back there up in these mountains. It cascades further down into the Nepal, Tarai, and eventually into Bihar. So this sediment deposition creates aggradation of river systems, particularly the Kosi River. And what will likely happen is this will impact the resilience of flood embankment systems, both within Nepal, Tarai, and Bihar. Such fast aggradation of, again, river systems are now widespread, not only into the Kosi River systems alone, but along across the Himalayan belt, not only in perhaps Nepal, but also in all the way up to Bangladesh. And so the Chure rivers and the Himalayan rivers that flow down downstream actually intersect a lot of linear infrastructures, such as railways that are coming up, roads and bridges, they're intercepting drainages. So understanding and monitoring such complex mountain hazards of transboundary nature and finding solutions for such phenomenon is beyond our technical and financial capacity within institutions like Nepal. It really requires joint actions with initiatives such as the CDRI. So on one hand, Nepal's lessons from the 2015 earthquake, especially on people-centered inclusive infrastructure, is a unique lesson that we could really provide of support to the international community and be prepared for such kind of incident, but also kind of help in designing reconstruction and recovery programs. But on the other hand, we are really grappling with these shocks and disasters that are exacerbated by climate change risks that countries like Nepal confront, especially mountainous settings with complex and compounding hazards that transcends not only within the country itself, but also a lot of other political boundaries. And so this is where Nepal could act as a voice representing such land-linked countries. Mm-hmm. The NDRMA, the government of Nepal, is interested to share the lessons and these experiences to the international community. And partnering with CDRI, we at NDRMA and other relevant government agencies and non-governmental agencies such as NSET and others, we really look forward for joint actions with USAID, with World Bank, ADB, the UNDP, and other private sector agencies in collectively understanding risk, learning lessons from these past disasters and building a resilient, inclusive infrastructures, not only within Nepal, but also contributing elsewhere around the world. So with these words, I again would like to kind of urge you all for your continued support and enhanced support to Nepal and to NDRMA to help build a resilient country, but also help contribute to building resilience of infrastructures and communities across the world. With these words, I'd like to end my notes. Over to you, Rita. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Pokhrel. I think you have Nepal as a country after the earthquake has gained a reputation for providing good examples of people-centered recovery. Especially you mentioned about your owner-driven reconstruction program, housing reconstruction program, and in that the role of women and communities, women and particularly the Masons that you raise, to make structural changes, in their identity, in their lives. I think this is something that you have specially mentioned. Also knowing that, this kind of approach is critical in your country, a landlocked country like Nepal, where communities are sparse and live outside. So you had to go through the whole exercise of relocating communities. So thank you very much. And also inviting people and partners to come and join Nepal in understanding the risks much better and collaborating for addressing the risk that is coming also ahead. We also would like to actually at this point of time just mention about our interest in taking across Nepal's lessons. You just mentioned that as a purpose. And for all of your information, we are having the World Reconstruction Conference from 23rd and 24th May in the prep days of the global platform for disaster risk reduction at Bali, Indonesia. And that's an opportunity also probably for several countries to share and exchange experiences. And I'm sure you will have that opportunity. I would like now introduce our eminent panelists. We have 4 people, as I mentioned here. We have online 3 panelists, and we have Dr. Kit here. Our first panelist today is Mr. David Radford Wilson. He's the Deputy Program Coordinator, Director and Commercial Director for the United Kingdom Delivery Team, working with the Peru Reconstruction Authority program, and he's going to present to us the case study of reconstruction of the El Nino storms in Peru in 2017. Leads the organization that Mr. David Radford works with currently, worked with community there and deployed digital tools in designing reconstruction, resilience of building, water supply systems and hospitals. So over to you, Mr. David Radford.
Thank you, Ethan. It's very kind. And thank you. And the program is actually still continuing at the moment. I'm back in the UK this week, but I'll be back out to Nepal, back out to Peru on Monday. It's massive program, and I think I've only got sort of 10 minutes to skim over it. So let me give you a program itself, and then concentrate in on the sort of stakeholder engagement pieces and the knowledge transfer aspects of the program, which I think will be of most interest. Are you able to see the slides, or are you able to share slides?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
If we could flick those on one, if we could, thank you. As you said, Rita, the El Nino events back in 2017 come around every 5 to 8 years in Peru. They've been getting steadily worse and are expected to get worse again with climate change issues. The last one, if you can flick on the slides, please, really affected the northern half of Peru and created massive flooding, massive infrastructure devastation. Next slide, please. Which caused both a massive commercial impact, but clearly a massive social impact in destroying roads, railways, hospitals, schools, and housing. If you can flick on one, please, thank you. The Peruvian government set up a special vehicle, special government department, the Autoridad de Reconstruction con Cambios, the Authority of Reconstruction with changes, because they wanted not only to build back better the infrastructure that had been destroyed, but also protect that infrastructure. So the program aims to build 74 schools, 16 hospitals, but also then put in the river defenses for 17 rivers to protect that infrastructure by the time the next El Nino comes around. Next slide, please. The Peruvian government reached out, and it was interesting, Anil, you talked about greater joint action. Well, the Peruvian government reached out internationally and ended up pairing with the UK government to support this program, and a consortium of 3 companies, Leeds International being one, Mace and Arup, are supporting the Peruvian government, providing program management and PMO services to really set up and run what is effectively a national level infrastructure program, and the knowledge transfer to teach the Peruvian governments how to do that and raise their capacity, but also the delivery assurance, both technical, to make sure that the designs are correct, the risk assessments are correct, and best practice is being used for those, and to support the delivery itself. So they're the 3 main aspects of the program: setting up a program management office and transferring the skills to run that, assuring the delivery, and then transferring as much knowledge as possible. Next slide, please. So the aim over we've been running now for 18 months, is really that the international consortium hands over the running of the whole program, and the Peruvian government departments are able to run that program themselves. Next slide, please. Thank you. Of all the things that we are doing and setting up and running the PMO, if I can just focus really in on the stakeholder communications, because as we all know, that and as Rita, you said at the start, that is one of the bits in a massive program really can make so much difference. So from a national level downwards, I suppose, taking it in that view, one of the aspects of this program is being able to set up a digital backbone that will connect all of the 200 plus projects spread over a couple of 1,000 kilometers into a central program management office, so that all of the programs are connected, and those running the portfolio and the program really know what is happening in each project. Each of our contractors is contractually obliged to produce what we call good neighborhood plans, which is effectively a localized stakeholder management plan for that specific project, be it school, bit of river defense, or hospital. So they and we have had to, in many cases, teach them what that needs to look like, as far as identifying all the local stakeholders, understanding what their concerns or issues are, making sure we've got the right interaction and communications with them, and being able to regularly meet in two-way dialogue to foresee, mitigate, and overcome issues that are either already existing or may come up in the future. And this was actually quite a new way of doing business in many parts of Peru, and not least getting the commercial contractors to be responsible for doing this at a grassroots level. All of that information is able to be fed back into the PMO through the digital backbone. So actually, the government departments running it can very quickly see which areas have significant issues and can then add support and interaction to try and solve the issues before and mitigate those before they become too serious. So you're really trying to connect local interaction with regional government management, with the national government management, the whole portfolio, which has not really been done before in Peru. Next slide, please. As part of the knowledge transfer aspects, of course, trying to both teach in that 10% of formal classes, then pass on sort of 20% of knowledge by sitting next to our colleagues on a day-to-day basis, and using the real-time programs to coach and teach and lead, and then handing over that knowledge as we step through the setting up and mobilization, the delivery, advising technically on the designs, advising on the delivery, and then closing the programs out. I'm pleased to say that we have most of the schools being closed out over this summer period. That has been fantastic to pass that knowledge transfer on. And I think for me, both the stakeholder management aspects and the knowledge transfer aspect of this program, when we're looking at now trying to make a real difference at a national level, to counter the effects of climate change and to create really resilient infrastructure in the future, those aspects of using our digital technology to do that, making sure that the community interaction is being done at all levels, and then using our best practice that those of us who've worked in this environment for years have honed in the experience we've got, but really going out of our way specifically as part of the program to pass that knowledge on to the countries we're working in, then have the ability to run these programs themselves. For me, that is for us being a great way to produce really effective results at a national level. And I'll probably leave that there. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for sharing these experiences, particularly in such a large-scale program, and working with the new Reconstruction Authority, just like Nepal established one. Must have been quite challenging to establish such a large digital platform that runs across 200 projects. I think, and then go through the whole consultation process with local stakeholders. That's a very significant shared experiences that others would be interested as well. What I would like to do probably at this point of time, and sorry, I'm not following the script, I should have introduced all our panelists before we went into question and answer, which I will do right now. But before that, I would like to actually ask Mr. Anil Pokhrel, if you would like to share the kind of interface that they had between communities and the national government in addressing some of the difficulties they had, whether it was in housing or community infrastructure reconstruction. I do understand that you had an opportunity to establish some sort of grievance mechanisms between which communities and the government had interface. And again, understanding again from Peru, what was the way in which communities actually interacted directly with the National Reconstruction Authority that you mentioned? I think those 2 points. First we hear from Mr. Anil Pokhrel, then go back to David for that.
Thanks, Rita. Am I audible?
Yes.
So to the central of especially the housing reconstruction process, we had a wonderfully designed grievance handling mechanism. And the grievances were to be sorted out by a sitting judge. So with all those information based on the field surveys, damage grade assessments. So that's how it really allowed individual families to make a case for it, make a case for their houses so that they receive those tranches. But central to this process was also the role of municipal governments. Again, the election hadn't happened back almost for 20 years, but there was a mechanism where the local governments were really in the front line, especially for dealing with those issues, those grievances. Now on taking this forward, what we see is again continuing that process of again almost around like 38,000 cases that also kind of decided on a daily basis, where technical experts, but also lawyers and these people sit down together. That's how these grievances are handled over time, and so that's how they record into the systems. So this is something that we we are proud of. Again, the experience that Nepal government has been able to especially do it with NRA's leadership in the reconstruction process. Now, when it comes to taking these lessons, especially for reconstructing houses that were damaged either by floods, landslides, and even forest fires, we're taking a similar approach in terms of, again, allowing the municipal governments to take a lead on this for addressing these concerns, so that it's dealt at the local level, the local municipal governments itself. Our constitutional jurisdiction allows the local governments to really deal with this kind of situation. So this is where the individuals, the families, the communities, and the ward elected representatives, but also the municipal governments are really on the front lines, especially with handling these kind of situations.
Thank you very much. And David, back to you again, with a similar question about how within the 200 projects where you already developed neighborhood plans, what was the interface by which they communicated with the Reconstruction Authority of Peru or various levels of administration there?
Yes, thank you, Rita. The Authority of Reconstruction with Changes set up two external offices outside Lima, one up in Piura and one in Trujillo. So that it enabled greater access of ARCC staff to visit the sites. Clearly, before the sites became active and when still in the design stages, it was really community meetings organised regularly with local government and local stakeholders, and then those continuing once the satellite offices came into operation and the sites became live. So we were able to continually visit the subcontractors who are actually doing the construction and the stakeholders throughout the process of construction. I think being able to feed the information and the results of those meetings back and any issues that are being collected back electronically, so the interaction was known more broadly than just at a very local level, I think was one of the things that made a bit of difference and made those meetings more effective.
Thank you, David. I will now introduce the other panelists to you, and now we have on my left Dr. Kit Miyamoto. He's the CEO of Miyamoto International. He provides policy consultation. I know has vast experience in the area of reconstruction in all over the world. He works a lot closely with the World Bank, USAID, UN agencies, governments, and the private sector. I've met a team of professionals who work specifically in seismic recovery projects elsewhere. And then of mention is, I think, the ones that they worked in Sichuan earthquake in China, Haiti earthquake 2010, and then the latest one last year, 2011 Japan earthquake, a significant experience there in Nepal as well, and the Puerto Rico earthquakes. So before I give over to Dr. Kit Miyamoto, may I also introduce our other speakers. I have Mr. Kevin Maitheva from Fiji, National Disaster Management Authority. Thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Maitewa is the Senior Disaster Risk Reduction Officer in the Fiji for Eastern Division of Fiji in the Maritime region. He joined the NDMO in October 2017, and before that he worked for the University of South Pacific and Fiji Development Bank. He holds a degree in environmental studies and a master's degrees in climate change from the University of South Pacific. And we are very happy to have you, Mr. Maitewa. Thank you for joining us. I know someone else was supposed to join, but thanks a lot for coming on board. Our next speaker will be Mr. Kamran Akbar. He's with the World Bank. He's a senior social development specialist, very appropriate for this particular session. He is based in Pakistan now, but he has worked in Nepal for a pretty significant amount of time, 5 years, as the task team leader for the Nepal Housing Reconstruction Project. We've already heard significant, had discussion about the OHDR of Nepal. but it will be very interesting to hear about the 120,000 housing units that he oversaw the reconstruction of in Nepal and then following in Pakistan as well. But of very much interest to me personally, Mr. Kamran, was that you was a project director of IDA grant for Earthquake Disability Project. And so I'm very much looking forward to knowing very much about how people with disabilities were served through all the reconstruction that was done. So right now, I will hand over to Dr. Kit Miyamoto. After he speaks, I will invite some reflections from other panelists as well. Over to you.
All right, thanks so much, Rita. You want to size up? Excellent. So next 10 minutes, I want to talk about community involvement in response and recovery after that disaster. Just a little bit of our company. As you can see, we're located in about 25 different locations globally, and we're in a so-called red zone, the line of fire. That's where we're located at. And so here's the resiliency, right? So there's an event that happens, either earthquake or hurricane or fire, whatever it would be, there's a direct loss. It could be number of buildings, or could it be the payrolls, or could it be social service or populations, drops. Then there's a downtime, stoppage because of a disaster damage assessment, planning, and so on. Then reconstruction started. So as you can see, if the area is smaller, the higher the resiliency would be. So you can address the resiliency by either reducing direct loss or reducing the recovery time, either way. And participation of a community is so important. As Dr. Pokhrel said, to have the local government, local communities to just lead the effort, I think this is such a critical part, I do believe. So this is a 2021 Haiti earthquake. That's magnitude 7.2 last August. It killed about 3,000 people, and about 1 million people was affected. And about 180,000 buildings are exposed, and out of that, 100,000 buildings are damaged. About 9,000 totally collapsed. And right after that, actually, there's a Hurricane Grace hit the island. So it was a double disaster happened there. So there's a quite widespread damage all over the places, from a traditional house to a new construction. And this earthquake, maybe many people do not remember anymore, because right after there's Afghanistan, the things happen, evacuation, all that. So never attracted the major international news into it. So therefore, no news, no funding, no international funding at least. So as you know, Haiti is one of the most, the really poor country. So there's no money. How are we going to go about it? Well, first of all, we got to find out exactly what extent of damage is and what's cost of it. How can deal with that? So this is actually financed by the World Bank and operated by the UNOPS and us. And we selected 700 engineers, not only from just Haiti, but actually affected area, which is the very remote part of Haiti, by the way. But there's a plane of engineers in the area, and we selected 700 engineers to train them. I think it's really important to use the locally available professionals or masons or people, because what they need is they need income. The disaster happens and there's no jobs because business stops. So just keep the money much as possible in local level is extremely critical. So we end up to about 520 combination of engineers, about 430 engineers and 100 about social communicators we call. Because they assess not only damage, structural damage, but also that they need to understand what's the social context of it. What kind of needs people need. That's a really important part of it. So 520 total. I think to me, like the best part of this is there are only 2 internationals involved. That's it. It's so different from 2010 event. We did a similar thing back in 2010 Haiti event. There, we had about similar number of the engineers, about 500 engineers. Also probably at least 40, 50, maybe 60, they're international engineers. No, this time. The reason is the capacity is improved in the last 10 years in Haiti, because the reconstruction happened or the capacity building happened in the local levels. Capacity building does work. Then this particular case is also that they use this device. It's a COBOL, it's an open source platform actually, and assess that not only damage, but also repair methods and cost at the simultaneously. This is something we learned from a 2010 event. It took us 3 years to assess the damage and the repair, because you have to go back again, right? And really expensive. But this time, actually, we combined in one platform. So not only assessment damage, but also repair costs at the same time. Something like this. And repair, how we actually define that. So MTPTC, that's the Ministry of Public Works in Haiti, has this international standard guideline showing how actually repair needed made to certain damage. We identify about 20 damages, typical damage, which covers about 98% of the damage out there. And each of the 20 damages assigned how to fix it and program into the quantity of materials needed to fix it, essentially. So only thing engineers need to do on the site is measure the cracks and assign the damage patterns numbers. It will automatically calculate out. And each household, we put the QR code, the sticker into it, so homeowners can actually download to how to fix the houses and how much cost of it. So that's how actually worked out. And then that's this result of it, and using this GIS platform. This is actually international effort. Our team in India, actually, they're experts in the GIS, actually start doing the whole data analysis from here. Collaboration with the Haitian engineers. So now have this so-called information at each household, right? But that's the only beginning. Now next step is knowing the fact is not much funding going to that country, so just empower not only the masons in an area, but also homeowners. So train the homeowners to understand how to actually download it, and what is the best practice, what does actually right construction look like using that report, essentially. So that's I think that's a really critical, not only just professionals to be trained, but all the people who are affected be trained. So this is a first phase of it, and hopefully we can get to much more than that. So this is actually using a really high-tech device, to really capture damage, but also at the same time, the training of local people. 2020 Puerto Rico earthquake, similar thing, there's magnitude 6.4. About 46,000 people become homeless. They lost homes. And I think this challenge is, earthquake was January. And as you remember, the COVID hit around March. So it got shut down right after that. Something like this. This two-story building used to be. The school used to be 3-story. It's kind of unfortunate, I see this kind of damage everywhere. It's essentially the same thing. It doesn't matter. Could it be Japan? Could it be Peru? Could it be Puerto Rico? Could it be Haiti? It's just way the non-confirmed concrete structures fail so badly. And one of the things about Haiti, some of the traditional built construction do much better than a newer construction. Same thing on Nepal also. Some of the traditionally built houses. Yeah, that's really well. So just depends. It doesn't newer doesn't mean it's better actually. So warehouses. So one of the things we did there is engage the community. Just have a so-called town hall meeting to really discuss what happened to their island, because earthquake is new for them. Last one was about almost 100 years ago. Even it was an earthquake-prone area, so the memory of earthquake doesn't really exist. Hurricanes, no problem. Post-hurricanes, no problem. They go through this every year. But the earthquake is something new thing. So it was a very difficult for people to understand this aftershocks, how long it's going to last, when the school is going to be open, how the housing can be repaired. So involvement of community on Then right after we finish all the community things, everything gets shut down. What we're going to do, we got plenty of damaged buildings. And FEMA is the U.S. Emergency Response Funding Organization. And they do have a direct assistance. This case, about $35,000 maximum per household. Which is actually fairly decent money to fix most of the houses. But to get the money, homeowners, they have to have engineering plans. They have to get the contractor's estimate. They apply to FEMA. It takes a while. And especially usually what happens after disaster is shortage of engineers. That's always like that,
Yes.
you know, contractors, engineers, materials, especially under the COVID. So the dilemma is there's not many engineers and also COVID, and they need to produce a report. We applied a similar thing. We just applied the app. It's actually developed for this, specifically for this. Either technician or homeowners, they gather the information the same way. App can be downloaded. And they collect the data. And remotely, so something simple, things like this, what the damage is at. The same technique as I described in Haiti, just numbering of that so-called the damage patterns. Then in this particular case, remotely controlled by the qualified structural engineer. Construction engineer cannot be on the site, so homeowners actually do the tasks and just remotely have a discussion with them to collect the data. Then produce a report. Most important for them is you can see $5,500 there. That's the information homeowners need. Once the information is there, they can actually apply to FEMA. They can get the money, right? Really quickly, actually. So this is something really critical. And this particular area is a bit, very in southern part of Puerto Rico, is not rich area at all. And usually engineers charge about $2,500 or something like that to get that report going. It's a lot of money, actually, yes. Even out there. But this particular case, it's like a tenth of a cost, essentially, because the engineers don't have to be on the site, And because of that, they're able to just reduce the so-called initial investment per se, but be able to get the money from FEMA. This is actually very important one. By the way, this app was built by iBuilt. That's a company. They actually done this for this particular job. That's about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that excellent presentation. I would actually request probably Mr. Akbar or Kevin to kind of reflect on this presentation a little bit before I just hand over to the next speaker. Very interesting examples, two very different contexts completely. And so probably if you have any reflections or questions to come up with, please. A minute each, Mr. Akbar first, and then we go to Mr. Maitewa.
Well, just one small point which was coming to my mind was that it seems that people had choice. It's $35,000 or whatever the amount mentioned was not fixed. It was rather it varied. So that's I wanted to. Is my understanding correct or not? Because we had a different experience in case of Nepal and Pakistan. Thank you.
Yeah, even Mr. Akbar, could you repeat that? I think we quite didn't get your whole question.
No, I think what my understanding from the presentation is that the compensation or the housing reconstruction grant that was allocated per house probably varied from house to house and had a maximum limit.
Yes.
Whereas in case of Nepal and Pakistan, we had got a different different experience, and so both the approaches have their pros and cons. So I'll stop over it. That was my question. Thank you.
Yeah. Do you want to respond before Mr. Maitheva comes on board?
Oh, you mean that I guess it was comments about
Yeah.
Well, I mean that for this Puerto Rico case, house by house is different. So sometimes 5,000. It just depends on whatever damage was. The FEMA will compensate.
Yes.
That's a system like that. The maximum is $35,000, which means if house collapsed, it's $35,000. Most of the cases, they actually what we call yellow tag. Yellow tag houses are slightly damaged, still dangerous by the way, but the slightly damaged. Many cases, the cost is somewhere between $10,000 to $15,000 to repair actually. So it was very affordable, and also it's not like FEMA has an unlimited amount of money either. It's very important to just be effective about it. So the analysis itself is fast, cheap in a sense, and but able to get the information fast. Speed is also critical. Yes, it's so important.
Absolutely.
Because many homeowners have nowhere to go, so they actually live in so dangerous buildings. Actually.
Yes.
So there's no options. So speed is key, and the cost is the key, and make sure it have to be hopefully less than $35,000.
Thank you. Can I ask Mr. Maitewa, do you have any comments, reflections?
Yes, thank you, Madam Moderator. Firstly, Mr. Miyamoto, thank you for your presentation. It was quite enlightening. One thing that's really stuck out to me during your presentation was that you mentioned Puerto Rico has experience with the tropical cyclones, but not so much earthquakes. For Fiji, I believe we are very similar in that sense. We can experience a tropical cyclone at least once, twice, sometimes 3 times in the cyclone season, which is between November and April. So my question to you, or my request, is when you experience earthquakes or the past earthquake experience that you've gone through, is there any document that you can share with me so I can use it as a sort of a base for us, for my country to develop a earthquake guideline? We are in the process of trying to develop a guideline. To be honest, my colleague from our Mineral Resources Department team called me today to have a side meeting at this conference that we are currently attending to discuss this earthquake guideline. So if you have any documents or lessons learned, I believe it will be very useful for my country.
Most definitely, Kevin. Most definitely. And I think that the key is to use the whatever locally happening. Just have to make it a little better in many cases, but just make it a little better. And I think that's really important because in many cases I see the big disaster happens. And so-called new technology, new things coming through, especially some companies coming through want something completely new. It doesn't really make sense, actually. Many cases like a traditional way it's built, or even new, anyway, with any kind of construction, make it a little tiny tweak makes a huge difference. For example, in Haiti, that traditional houses I was talking about, it's actually made of a little piece of wood, but it's actually filled with the rocks. It's actually really resilient. When the earthquake comes, actually rocks shed off. It doesn't collapse because just rocks fall off. And it's dangerous though, because if you go inside, it's kind of dangerous, right? But it's kind of fall off. After fall off, the house doesn't collapse because we're just kind of stable by itself and there's no weights in there. So the house doesn't feel the earthquake anymore. But they can build back these rocks really fast. But hurricane comes, the roof fly up, they're gone. The wall stays because they're heavy, but they can build back in the roof in probably 1 week maximum. So what we done there is we don't change that. I think they got the really good things going on. The only thing we did is to make it a little safer. So usually just horizontal elements, the local wood, put the horizontal elements between this post, inside face, so rock doesn't fall inward. Rocks fall outward, you know what I mean? Little tweak like that, but we didn't want to change how they built things because that's only way they can build. They can use some strong straps or steel or anything like that. That's actually very important. But Kevin, yeah, it's most definitely. Yeah, I get you information. I'll send you all the information you need.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. I think that was very, very valuable. Something that is niggling in my mind that I am itching to ask you is, there are two very different economic contexts, Haiti as compared to Puerto Rico. One, very advanced economy with probably had all the digital footprint from before, whereas in Haiti it might have been very low. I was just wondering how you compare the two countries and the uptake of it, what challenges you had in Haiti vis-a-vis Puerto Rico, and particularly how women participated in these all processes. I mean, I could see the photograph in Puerto Rico where you had consultations where women were sitting, But how was it in Haiti, the uptake of the digital app vis-a-vis when you compare to two, and what challenges and lessons you have? Very quickly.
I think at the Haiti, I mean, obviously technology is less than, say, Puerto Rico for sure. I mean, in some cases, there's no internet nowhere, you know? So much more challenging, that's for sure. But I think it's a really important part of it, that communication with the homeowners. So that's why we didn't only send engineers, we have the social communicators send.
Okay.
You know why? Because, you know, I'm an engineer, you know, and we cannot talk so well. Okay? You need some specialized person can talk to the, you know, normal people. So they can talk, they can explain what this is about, you know. They can have access to the internet, they have to go some places, you know, stuff like that. So I think that's a really important, the communication component.
Thank you. Thank you. We now move to our third presentation from Mr. Kevin Maitewa.
Let me just try and share my screen with everyone. Just give me a moment.
Can you? Thank you.
Is it on? Can you guys see?
No, not yet. It'll be coming up, I guess. Yes, just coming up now.
What about our other colleagues? Can they see?
Well, it has some, your name and things like that, a title in it. If you maybe perhaps go to the next slide, maybe. Yes, perfect.
All right.
Perfect. Please go ahead now.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Today, or this evening, back in Fiji, I'll be talking about the relationship between disasters, infrastructure, and people in the Fijian context. Pardon poor connection at the moment.
The next slide is up. Yes.
It's not shown on my screen. My apologies. Is that the outline slide?
No, the next one, the tropical cyclone history in Fiji.
I can't see it on my screen. My apologies.
Why don't you speak to it, and they will be making this change.
Oh, here we go. I'm back online again. The tropical cyclones in Fiji. Are you on that slide?
Yes, the third slide.
Okay. So basically, in the past 10 years, Fiji has suffered 10 tropical cyclones. It is not the average one per year. Some years we've had 3, some 2. In the past 10 years, we've had 2 Category 5 cyclones and about 3 or 4 Category 4. It has costed 64 Fijian lives and costed over $3 billion in damages. The strongest tropical cyclone we've ever faced, the tropical cyclone Winston in 2016, where it claimed the lives of 44 people and cost the Fijian economy close to $2 billion. So tropical cyclone Winston is the second.
Can you hear us, Mr. Maitewa? We don't hear you. Disconnected? Okay. Let's wait for a couple of minutes. Meanwhile, you know, if there are questions from our audience, we'll be happy to take one right now. If you have someone online who would wish to ask a question, or someone from the audience, perhaps we could take that right now. Yeah. If not, you know, just some reflections on what already the 2 sessions or 3 sessions we had. I think one of the important part that I picked up right now from Miyamoto's presentation is about the empowering local people with information so that they can take the decisions. I think this is very critical. By doing so, you allow people to be able to, you know, you cut off the, you know, bureaucratic process, particularly what you mentioned in Haiti, that you had to hire an engineer for $2,500, which is a lot of money. I understand that. to get someone to assess it and then tell them this is where your structural damage is and here's what is certified and you can apply for it. So doing that process everywhere, I think cutting out red tape and bureaucratic processes, particularly helping local communities access government resources, is very, very critical. I think that was done in Nepal, where there's a whole component of social technical facilitation, like you mentioned, communicators, social scientists work on the ground to help people access resources. So I think that's something that we need to keep in mind in large infrastructure projects, because otherwise there is a lot of gap between what is the intent in doing things and what actually reaches people. So perhaps I think we turn over maybe to the next panelist, and then we'll come back to Mr. Maitheva later. Mr. Kamran Akbar, perhaps we turn over to you right now for your presentation, and then we'll come back to Maitewa.
May I request my...
It's reflected on.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we go to the next slide? First of all, I must say, hearing about the profile of the other speakers, I feel myself a pygmy. But I'm just going to share my experience from two countries. One is that of Nepal and the other from Pakistan. Both the projects were housing reconstruction projects and financed by the World Bank. What we can do is we can go for cross-learning because context across HKH region is similar. Can you go to the next slide, please? Now, if you look at the image on the right side, this is Barpak, the epicenter in case of Nepal, where it's an active landslide. And on the left is a landslide from Pakistan. So context is similar. And I'm so glad to note that Mr. Sushil Gewali, the driving force of Nepal Housing Reconstruction Project, is in the audience, is sitting there. So my best regards to him. So let's move to the next slide, please. Now, if you look at the style of construction, on the right is a school from Nepal after 2015 earthquake, and on left is a school from Pakistan after 2005 earthquake. So if you look at the construction style, if you look at the context, it is similar. And almost the culture across India, Pakistan, Nepal, and the whole of the Sahel region there are a lot of similarities. Can we go to the next slide, please, if you click? So in case of Pakistan, 8th October 2005, 7.6 megawatt, around 83,000 people died, and over 500,000 houses collapsed. Can you go to the next, please? And in case of Nepal, on 25th of April, 7.8 megawatt, around 9,000 deaths and 800,000 houses that were destroyed. Next slide, please. Now, what is our learning is, and this learning I'm sharing, I'm not a DRM expert at all. I just happened to head Pakistan Reconstruction Project as project director, and then Nepal as, I must say, worked in Government of Nepal as TTL. The first and the foremost in my personal view is that accountability in 3 years' time, emergencies are forgotten. So what happens is then you have to face audits and you have to be accountable. So documentation is critically important, that during the whole process, documentation has to be, if not perfect, at least as best as possible. Then as far as communities are concerned, involvement of communities is concerned, it is critically important that expectations are kept at the realistic possible level, because expectations are the strongest binding and unbinding force. If you look at this image on the left side, this is from Gorkha, Nepal, and these are Government of India beneficiaries, and there was UNDP on behalf of the Government of India was constantly keeping them involved and informed. On the right, you're seeing this image that I'll come to that later on. Now, my other point is that standardization is also very important. That depends on the scale, because in case of Nepal, it was around 800,000 houses, and in case of Pakistan, it was around 500,000 houses. So it was not possible to go case-by-case basis to, so in both the cases, what happened was that housing grant was standardized, and so were all the reconstruction standards. And how do you do that? Data, and in both the cases, management information system, that was huge. So even today, if you go back to Nepal, the data is there in MIS that has been handed over to NDRRME, and in case of Pakistan, that data is still available, though it is in MS Access format. Can we go to the next, please? Why should we involve communities? So they are not only the first responders, but the important thing is that evolution in these mountainous areas, that is the process of nature, and people have learned over centuries what works there and what not, what doesn't work. So how did we do that? Let me cite an example of Pakistan. When I was project director, I introduced the concept of weekly issues reporting. There were 110 engineers, and they were to report issues every week. But they had very strict instructions that don't report an issue without a suggested local solution. And also they were asked to observe, because these areas were very difficult to access, that what are the structures that have survived and what are the structures that have given maximum escape time. So on the left is a timber frame structure, what we call Dhaji structure, now that has been adopted by UN Habitat. This is, as I think Miyamoto was suggesting, this is a timber frame structure in which you do filling with small stones, and then mud. It is plastered with mud. It's a very safe structure. Now on the right is a dry stone masonry structure with interlocked wooden battens. Now this we found that in areas where which were water starved, this was the structure which developed over centuries, and in this structure also a lot of escape time was available for people. So we went back to the government, and government then adopted these structures in addition to those RCC structures. So what I would like to emphasize over here is this tool which we introduced, that report a problem with a solution only. Don't report a problem without a solution. So that gave us a lot of new ideas that were coming our ways, and that we fed back to the policy maker, and policy adjustments were made. Can we go to the next slide? I mean, so whatever we talk about, end of the day, disasters bring best of the people out, and they bring best of the people out also. So communities' involvement help us in many, many ways. Identification of the vulnerable is one of the areas where communities are instrumental. Good mobilization done, they would identify the vulnerable and very appropriate vulnerable. The second is a determination of eligibility, because there are land ownership issues. Like, for instance, what we have seen is that a house built by a great-grandfather was officially not, or was not transferred. So there were, let's say, 2 or 3 claimants. So it is always the community members which help to understand who would, I may say, in identification of beneficiaries and determination of eligibility. Similarly, historical background of the areas. Consultations, as I said, that because housing grants are involved, so our experience of social mobilization is money is the first to create doubts. So in order to make sure that there are no doubts created, there are no conflicts created, consultations open, transparent, and as much as possible. The other is balancing consultations and actions, because at times what happens is people go into perpetual consultations and actions are not taken. So it's critically important that consultations are done with communities and actions are also taken. And again, very important, communication, I would emphasize again and again, because communication is the key to establish trust between outsiders and the affected people. We have to take quick decisions also, and decision making is critically important in these difficult times, and at times you take hard decisions. You have to take hard decisions also. And please, can we go to the next slide? Livelihoods, very rightly pointed out by the earlier speaker. Livelihood restoration is critically important. On the left, you are seeing this image from National Reconstruction Authority in Nepal's housing reconstruction, where local women they got some earned some wages by participating in housing reconstruction. Again, we have to go for context-based solutions. On the right, you will see example of this one innovation which we introduced over there in mountainous areas of Pakistan. The problem is, the moment there is a disaster, these block-making factories, they emerge everywhere. This happened in Nepal, this happened in Pakistan. And our problem was, we tested these blocks which were produced in these overnight emerging factories, and we found that they were not safe. So what we did, that we designed a mold which could make 3 different types of blocks, which was one for vertical reinforcement bar, the other for the corner, and so on and so forth. And then suggested communities, instead of transporting 18 or 16 or 18 kilograms block to your home, why don't you transport a 5 kilogram cement bag and make a block at your own place? And then gave them a training for curing and all that kind of thing. So instead of going for, because we could not stop emergence of these block making factories. So localized level, that again it's very important that people start earning some money. And very important, please take your financial management and procurement colleagues to field visit so that they can also start understanding that what kind of things you are dealing with. Next, please. Can't go back to disasters, so bring life and laughter back. On the left is an IDP camp, which I was managing, and the first thing we introduced over there was these rides for children, and overnight, the whole environment changed. On the right is, again, Barpak. You can see, it was epicenter, and these young boys, they are playing, and the whole of the community was watching this game. Next, please. Collective action. We went to this a very difficult village. It was, I think, 6 hours climb, and we stayed overnight over there. Next day, there was a VIP visit that was coming. Overnight, it rained, and it was slush. So MI-17 was coming, and we checked. We called on this satellite phone, and we came to know that helicopter could not land because of the kind of a mud that happened there because of this rain. So when we informed community, they said what to do. I said that if you can make a helipad which can sustain weight of MI-17. So this old man on the left, he started with this slab, and then community got together and they prepared this helipad, and eventually we got this helicopter landed. And on the right hand corner, this is a small water supply scheme. They brought water from 8,500 feet to 6,000 feet, and you can look at the terrain where they are working. Next, please. Okay, person with disabilities. These are the special initiatives. A lot of credit to National Reconstruction Authority. In mountainous areas, our experience is that people are not going to access architects and engineers. So what was done in case of Nepal was that masons a special training program has been designed to train masons to identify needs of persons with disabilities. There are some very key principles or key messages that have been communicated. Number one, that every disability is different. So every disabled will have different needs. Just providing a ramp is not the solution. So where tactile paving is required, what is the size of the door, toilet seats, even placement of handles, placement of electric switches, all those kinds of things have been, documented. Our trainer's manual was developed, and our mason's handbook was also developed. 148 NRA engineers were trained to become trainers for the masons. So that, and this is something which will be there, which will be very much there even when the project has gone, and these masons will start working under normal market situations. You can see on the left is one of our short-term consultant. He's an architect himself and a person with disability. Next, please. I'll talk a little bit of disability again. This was a program which we introduced in September 2019. These were NRA's earthquake beneficiaries, and these were persons with disabilities. Now, our training model was, and this is something which we had been doing a lot during the last 20 years, that these trainers, they have to establish a real business and real market with their own money for 2 to 3 days, and then we start the training. Either they would have made a profit or a loss, and then they start learning. The idea basically is empathizing. Empathy, instead of sympathizing with persons with disability, empathizing with disability is critically important to understand what they go through. On the right is one of our trainees in Nepal from this Inclusive Entrepreneurship Development Program. He's a wheelchair-bound person. His life expectancy is just 10 years. He established a tea stall. And what is very interesting, this was in 2019. And in 2021, I again went to this place, and this business is growing, and he is married also. So what he has got from this training is not only hope, rather and business plan, but also a hope and will to live and survive. Can we go to the next, please? First image, Begum Jan. So she, can you click it? Next, please. Okay. Her husband died. She had 4 sons, all were persons with disabilities. The community got together and they constructed her house first. So the first picture you saw with tears in her eyes, that was of 2006, and this was Begum Jan in 2009. So what communities can do, or collective actions can do, is it can bring life back to disaster-affected communities. So I'll stop over here. There is so much to share, but I will say paucity of time is there. Thank you very much. That's it from my side.
Thank you, Kamran. I would invite actually David Radford to kind of reflect on Kamran's presentation and draw parallels, if he has, in Peru about the experience of collective action. And then perhaps Dr. Miyamoto before we go to our next speaker.
Thank you, Kamran. Thank you, Rita. I think it's really interesting. One thing that's been brought up out of these presentations is the need for preemptive action to prepare communities before disasters hit. And I think some of the pre-training and training of the Masons to identify disabilities, as Cameron was saying, I think is really valuable, because so often we're reacting to a climate event and trying to rush to catch up. And I think if we're able to get any times we're able to get better at pre-training, pre-organizing, teaching the families and the communities of some of the smaller steps they can do for themselves, either in how their buildings are constructed or how to react if an emergency does happen, then I think that all stands us in good stead. In Peru, we're at the other end. Sadly, we are rebuilding post, and actually quite some time post the event, because the initial reaction wasn't particularly swift. So we would probably have a lot to learn on that front. Hopefully, there will be more reactive in Peru next time there is a disaster.
Thank you. Dr. Miyamoto, how does this compare to Haiti?
I think it's really fascinating, Mr. Kamran. Especially you talked about the training of Masons for identify the disabled people's needs, I guess my question I had is, what would be that case like that? How would you do that? What was the training is like? The training of Masons for disabled person.
Maybe he can clarify. Yeah. I understood as they had an architect who was disabled, and they were designing houses and needs of people with disability. But Mr. Akbar, do you want to clarify?
Yeah, exactly. You're absolutely right. There was an architect who was a person with disability himself, and there was one comment engineer also, a lady, but she also had a disability. Her arm was not functional. So this architect was instrumental in what person with disabilities need. Then we facilitated. It was quite a long process that visits of these engineers to different disability institutions, where they saw what are the specific needs of persons with disabilities. And what was very important was their realization that this is a segment of a society which is generally neglected, and especially before and after disasters. So these were the kinds of things. And then as far as Masons are concerned, there was, because you see, seeing is believing, there was one house which was constructed by an international NGO for a person with disability, and it was not accessible at all for the beneficiary. So that was a starting point for us, that, okay, fine, what has happened? That why this person has not been able to enter the house. And from there, all the things started. And then this architect came and he started giving training to these persons with disabilities. So we can share these documents with you. That's not a problem at all.
Thank you very much. We move to our final speaker for this evening, Mr. Kevin Maitewa. I know we can't see you, but it's fine. I think you can start your presentation and it will be shown on the screen here.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Slide 5, please.
Next slide.
Yes, I think I got cut off at slide 5. I'm going to start over again.
Yes.
Start over again? Sure.
No, I think it's fine. I think we can do with this style. We start with the institutional arrangements at the national level.
Okay. All right. So, colleagues, thank you again for bearing with me and my internet connection. So, before I got cut off, this is the arrangement at the national level. So, we work with our first responders. So, they are from the disciplined forces, the Fiji Army, the police, the fire, Fiji Corrections, Fiji Navy, and also we have disaster liaison officers who come from different ministries. Next slide, please. So these are the disaster arrangements at the sub-national level. So in Fiji, we have 4 main administrative divisions. They are the Western, Northern, Central, and Eastern. So each division is governed by divisional commissioner. At the divisional level, the commissioners coordinate all government activities, not just for disaster, but also for development, complaints, climate change adaptation, you name it. They are the ones who are coordinating all the different government agencies on the ground and in rural areas. Next slide, please. These are our guiding legislation. So the ones that are highlighted are the ones that are relevant to the NDMO. So we have a 1998 National Disaster Management Act, which is under review, the 1995 Disaster Management Plan, the Fiji has a 5 and 20-year development plan, and of course the Sendai framework. Next slide, please. So the role of communities in disaster preparedness. We at the NDMO try to encourage communities to have a disaster committee. So a disaster committee is responsible for mobilizing committee members when the warning is given of a pending disaster. In our case in Fiji, it's a tropical cyclone, which is quite common. So these committees actually try and identify the evacuation places and evacuation routes, make sure that all hands are accounted for, and they work with the youth groups in case of an evacuation to evacuate the most vulnerable. So the women, the old, the young children, people with disabilities. That's how this committee works. Apart from that, the committee also works to safeguard their community assets. So the community halls, churches, water tanks, fiberglass boats, fishing nets, agriculture equipment, all of these community assets. The NDMO in Fiji works with the development partners to conduct community-based disaster risk management training. So this training is to train communities on how to prepare, respond, and recover from natural disasters. So one of the outcomes of this training is forming a disaster committee within the village or settlement, and also to have mock evacuation exercises that identify community hazards within the community and potential threats. Next slide, please. The community involvement in reconstruction. So in Fiji, after tropical cyclone, it's quite common for communities, when it is safe, to go out and start cleaning their own compounds, the roads in front of the communities, drainage systems, and whatnot. So it's sort of like an unspoken work that you do. They also engage in repairing the community assets, like the halls and churches I mentioned earlier. And if their boats or their fishing nets or their agriculture equipment is been tossed around, they also try and salvage it. So post-tropical cyclone incident in 2016, the Fijian government initiated the Build Back Better initiative. So this is for all structures to be at least Cat 5 government structures, that is, and also to build back your homes better. So this was done by teaching communities basic carpentry and what can be done to strengthen their structures, and also to make use of available resources like timber or gravel or rocks that are available. Apart from that, we encourage the fast track recovery of the resource sector. So agriculture, fisheries, forestry. This is both for economic, to get people livelihoods back on track, and also for food security reasons. Yeah. And then in Fiji, we have the Water Authority of Fiji responsible for disseminating water around the country. So what the Water Authority of Fiji does, they work with the water community for villages to assist in the repairing of water infrastructure in the villages. So their pipes, their tanks, it'll vary from community to community. Next slide, please. So the involvement of vulnerable groups. Like I mentioned earlier, the disaster committee. Apart from the disaster committee, there's other committees within the communities around Fiji, so development committees, water committees, and so forth. It is mandated that within the committees, you must have a rep from each demographic within the community. So a male rep, a female rep, a youth rep, a disabled person. So that way they have a say in the decision-making process of the community and of the development initiatives of the community. So when you include youth as well, you also groom them to become future leaders within the communities, and you sort of show them the ropes of how things are done, and where also they can look at things where there's room for improvement. Yeah? Next slide, please. So just to conclude, I believe we can underestimate the importance of infrastructure. It makes our lives very comfortable. However, we must also need to train our communities on how to maintain and repair their assets. So that way they do not depend on the state or donors for help. They become self-reliant and resilient. It is my firm belief that building capacity within communities makes them resilient towards climate change and natural disasters. Thank you so much for your time. And if you have any questions or comments, please, I'll be more than happy to answer your questions and listen to your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Maitheva. Thank you for that example from Fiji, another small island among the others that we were talking about. I think community participation is much more voluntary, organic than in other communities, in larger communities, where we have to really organize people to come together. Here it's just almost voluntary. As soon as something happens, people come together almost naturally to start rebuilding. So that's something, I think, key lessons for us, particularly from small islands, which as you would have seen from his presentation, is affected much more in a larger scale than we had imagined. We have about 6 minutes to go. Samir, is that right? 6 minutes to go. I will request each of our panelists to give 2 minutes, maybe 1.5 minutes of reflections, or 1 minute of reflection each before we wrap up this evening. You've been very patient, all of you. Just 1 minute each, and then we will wrap up. Mr. Pokhrel, why don't you start?
Thank you, Rita. What we could see is quite an interesting parallel between all of these countries, especially in terms of the damage to housing and other infrastructure, especially in context of earthquake. Nepal and Pakistan being such a similar kind of case. We're lucky in the case of Nepal, but Pakistan, the schools were open, and so you could see a much higher number of, again, casualties, deaths, especially children. But in terms of solutions, I guess this is where, again, having people at the front, having them being informed, communicating with right set of people who were able to kind of communicate into their language, and so that they're able to make decisions in terms of what options they to choose is the best way to kind of go ahead. Putting people in the front in terms of making decisions. This is best backed up with systems that would allow them to kind of report their communications, but also having data, MIS systems, so that this knowledge are again captured and used it for future decision making, and then also kind of replicating across areas where future disasters could likely happen. Is perhaps we could draw a similar thread across all of the presentations. But this is where, again, our experiences from Nepal, but also Pakistan and other regions could collectively kind of help inform a lot of other countries around the world where there's similar kind of risks from earthquake, but also other like cyclones and other kind of hazards. That's what we could kind of really glean it out from these threads of these presentations. And thanks to these wonderful panelists who have really put in some extreme work for getting all this information out. Thanks to everyone.
David, quickly, very quickly.
Very quickly coming off mute. I think for me, it just reinforces how much we have to learn from each other for all the good work and supporting communities and recovering from disasters and preparing for disasters around the world. So sharing our information, our experiences, I think is always time well spent. So again, thank you very much, CDRI, for allowing us to do that. And I've myself learned a lot from the other speakers. So thank you all.
Maitewa, do you have any last reflections? Just half a minute.
Yeah, I do. Just to echo what Mr. Wilson said, sharing experiences with each other is so important. But not only just the good things, but what didn't go well in the project and the community, I think is vital for us to actually learn and grow. And also we can innovate from our mistakes. Thank you so much again for this opportunity, CDRI. I really appreciate it.
Mr. Akbar, half a minute.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much. I'm really grateful to CDRI for this opportunity. I would just say that a person with disabilities is an area where we need to work more. Maybe go in depth into this area and see what experiences we have all over the world and share those experiences. Thank you.
Thank you. Last word to you before I just want to have one audience member at least speak, even if it is, before you.
Yeah, just quickly, to me, like a common theme tonight was essentially the was talking about respect of the community, but respect the local people, respect the local traditions. You know, I think that's what we're talking about. Yes. I think foreigners like us, we have some certain value to it, I think, still, kind of bring in that what we experienced in the past from different places, share both our failures and successes, especially failures, of what happened in different places. I think we can share with the local community, I think. I think that's, to me, what our roles is. But most importantly, the respect to those people. I think that's really critical.
Any one reflection from the audience before we wrap up? Yes, go ahead, please.
International.
Yes.
And good evening, everyone. This is Gauri from Miyamoto International, and it's been a very inspiring session and takes me back in time to a lot of time with community, and even now when we're working with people. And I think it puts in perspective the entire thought process of humanizing infrastructure, and at the same time that good intention is the beginning of taking a lot of things forward, whether it is utilizing the local capacities or the local materials, whether it is interacting with people, or whether it is getting that unique disabilities into perspective when we are into constructions, and whether it is ensuring the sustainability of all our efforts at all levels. So, I mean, it's been very, very inspiring. I have a lot to say, but we don't have so much time, but maybe some other time. But thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, Gauri, you quite summarized very well the whole discussion. I think I will not further try to summarize a lot of it. I think what was kind of very, very interesting is the thread across all the presentations, right? That we need to work with people. You just cannot ensure any success if you don't work with people. Number two is, I think, a particularly emphasis on you have to be very, very proactive and seek out opportunities to work with people with disabilities. It just doesn't happen automatically. You miss the mark if you just do anything without planning for them. So it has to be a deliberate effort and very much a planned action. And then about transfer of skills and knowledge, which is very, very critical. We can't swoop in there with our own systems and databases and apps, but leave them. And that example from Peru, how they transition from 25% to 100% handover to the local community and local government was critical. I think this is an extremely important point. So thank you very much for allowing me to anchor and moderate this session. It's been my pleasure. I was just thinking the same thing as someone mentioned that, David mentioned that UNDP probably works in all these countries except Puerto Rico. And yet today I sit here thinking that, wow, I never even knew that these things happened. So I think there's a lot for us to learn from each other and share experiences. Thank you for this wonderful evening, and thank you for your patience for being with us.